Okay, here we are. Let's dive back in. Not sure if the costume designer ever explained this, but maybe you could. Why would the powers that be have Beth wear gray and mainly yellow as her wardrobe? Well, the colors are definitely symbolic, but the thing is, if you look into different cultures and backgrounds and in histories and things like that, there are lots of different meanings to every color you can imagine. So we've had to rely very much on how the colors were used in order to figure out what their meaning is in the Walking Dead universe. And the best that I can tell you, this is going to be very general, you can get a lot more detailed and nuanced than this, but yellow generally represents escape, especially escape from death. So yellow is kind of a resurrection color. Now, of course, Beth was wearing yellow when she was shot, and so I promise that's not just us being hopeful and wishful thinking, but remember that in 7/12, which was a foreshadow of Rick disappearing into the CRM, he disappeared, he fell into a group of walkers, and Michonne really thought he was dead, which is a foreshadow of her thinking he was dead after the bridge blew up. And then he came out of a ride car off to the side, and then she was happy that he was alive, and they hugged and all of that. It was a reunion, a little mini reunion, but the ride car was yellow. Okay, so we see this, and we've seen it countless times. I probably couldn't even list all the times that we've seen something like that, and yellow is almost always involved. So it's escape because it's like escape from death or escape from possibly imprisonment of some kind, but it is kind of a resurrection color. Gray we're less sure about, but I know that W.D. Way, her biggest theory is that gray represents the way we would think of gray is not black or white, but it's the in-between. It's a gray area. And especially it might be a color of murkiness or mystery, not understanding exactly what happened there. So what she always says is that both Beth and Rick were wearing gray in the hallway at Coda. Beth because of her sweater and Rick because of his t-shirt, which was almost the same color. It was slightly lighter shade of gray, but it was gray. And then we have these two that have such parallel arcs, right? And she's the new sheriff in town. And that's all very, very intentional. So we may not be hitting on exactly, the detail that Gimple is thinking of when he uses these colors, but it's somewhere in that ballpark, from what we've observed. So I hope that helps. We do think that it's very, very intentional, the way that they use color here. Now that we already got a Michonne reunion, did Michonne told him about the whispers and the deaths of Tara, Henry, Enid, and especially Sadiq? We know that she told him about the Jocelyn thing, but did she told him what she had to do to rescue Judith? Speaking of Judith, was Michonne ever able to reach Judith on the radio as of showing this on your YouTube channel? So let me answer the last question first. Not that we know of. I don't think she was ever able to raise Judith on the radio. So she has been away a long time and has not talked to Judith in many years. As to what they have told each other, we really don't know. On the one hand, I would say don't assume they haven't told each other anything we haven't specifically seen on screen. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that they haven't told it to each other off screen. So what I mean is, I don't know if Michonne told him what she had to do to rescue Judith. In that case, I think kind of not, because remember she specifically said, I don't want to talk about what happened. And then he said, well, you killed her, right? And she just said yes. But the other stuff with the kids, that's super dark and that's super rough to talk about. And because she specifically said, I don't want to talk about that, I would think that she probably won't. And if she is going to talk about it, they will show us that. Now, other things are we can be less sure about. It just makes sense that off-screen people would talk about their past, at least in a very general sort of way. I always have this headcanon that when Beth shows up, you're going to have other characters from Alexandria who kind of sort of know what happened to her. Maybe not in great detail, because maybe it's too painful to talk about in detail. But I can see, maybe someone like Aaron, and someone says, oh, this is Maggie's younger sister. And he says something like, I thought Maggie's siblings all died. You know what I mean? And it's just because he's heard the general stories that her whole family died, that sort of thing, but not necessarily the details. So it just makes sense that they would talk to each other about that. But on the flip side, I could argue it either way, because we do know that Gimple does pay really close attention to these details. So, for example, there was an episode somewhere in season 10 or 11, okay, I don't remember exactly which one it was, where Daryl said to Judith, when this is over, I'm going to tell you all the stories about everyone who ever loved you. And we really pounced on that and thought it was sweet because, of course, he would have to tell her about Beth. So there's a good chance that Daryl did talk about Beth to Judith, but we haven't seen it. And yes, that's very frustrating. We totally want to hear him tell her those stories. But the point is, I think it could go either way. It's not illogical to think that they have, especially as they got to know people at Alexandria and became like family to them, that they would tell each other about their pasts and what happened, at least in a general way. So if at any point we learn that maybe Maggie talked to people about what happened to Beth, that's not going to be shocking, And especially as she had the pictures at Hilltop that Jadis painted, it just wouldn't be illogical that someone would be like, oh, well, who's that? Tell me about this person, But on the flip side, Gimple did have them put in this line between Daryl and Judith, and then there was the time that he was looking at the pictures with Lydia and said, not now, I'm not going to talk about them now, but someday. He doesn't have to put those in, right? Because as I said, it wouldn't be illogical for them to do that anyway. That's not going to bother the audience to find out that they did talk about that stuff off screen. So the fact that he is putting that in does make it seem like he pays really close attention to detail. And maybe he's trying to tell us, just so that we understand that off screen this is being talked about. Anyway, so I think there's a good chance that if Michonne hasn't told him about it, she will. But again, I'm not really giving you much of an answer. It could go either way. It could just go either way. And I think what it's really important for us to hear about, they will let us hear. And then if there's other things that it's not important that we hear them talking about it, but it is important that we know that they did talk about it, then that's more like when they'll give us indications that it was spoken about off screen. So what I mean is maybe they didn't want, especially at the time, for us to hear Daryl telling Judith about Beth, because that would have given too much of an indication of his feelings. And, she wasn't coming back yet, and they still are trying not to say her name, and all of the things that have been going on for years. But maybe when Beth shows up, Judith will at least have some inkling of who she is and be like, oh yeah, Daryl told me about you. He told me you took care of me when I was a baby. And that will be believable because of that line that Daryl said to Judith. So I just think that they're really strategic about that. As to whether Michonne has actually told Rick about the whispers, I don't know. But we're probably only going to hear that conversation if it becomes relevant in the current plot line. And otherwise, they'll just leave it up to you whether you think she did or not. So I know that's kind of a non-answer, sorry. Best I have, though. Did Michonne ever question Jadis Ann's whereabouts after Rick blew up the bridge and got taken away by the CRM? Did Negan and or Gabriel ever thought of her at all? I thought about this too. I'm sure that people noticed that she disappeared. I'm sure that's true. And I'm assuming they just assumed she disappeared on her own. To us, it seems really suspicious, and why would you not question that they disappeared at the same time? I think that's what you're getting at here. But they saw the bridge blow up with Rick on it, and they didn't see Jadis. So it's probably not a conclusion that they would jump to. Sometimes the most obvious things to someone on the outside looking in are just not obvious to the people who are in the thick of the trauma, right? I mean, it's kind of like saying, you could use the same argument for why they didn't show us the missing 17 days with Beth, because if her body disappeared, to us, to most of the audience, it would be like, okay, she's alive somewhere. And the writers know that, and they don't want anyone guessing that, or at least the general audience, right? So that's why they didn't show us that. They just skipped over it. And that might seem super obvious to us, the audience, but to the people who are there, it doesn't even occur to them that she might be alive because she was shot in the brain. And that's how you kill a walker. And, they're seeing evidence that maybe she turned and walked away, but I just don't think it would be super obvious to them that maybe she would be alive. They're just not even thinking that way at all. And it's not because they're dumb or anything like that. It's just being in the thick of the trauma kind of puts blinders on you, So same kind of thing here. I just don't think that anyone really connected the idea of Anne leaving at the same time Rick did. And obviously Gabriel would, because he was with her and then she disappeared. But it was actually after that Rick disappeared. Jadis had taken off like the day before. And so I just don't think people would really connect the two. If you've watched episode 5, then you know that Gabriel, depending on whether it was a dream of Jadis's or not, it seems that Gabriel thought of her, just depending on if that's real. But I am actually, me and my fellow theorists have talked about Negan before, and did he ever tell anyone that he saw a helicopter when he was with her? And she clearly had some inkling what it was, and did he ever tell anyone that? Negan is enough of an enigma that he really might not have. Like with other characters, it would be like, well, duh, of course they would tell someone that. But Negan's kind of an exception. He really might not, because he's just that way, So we don't really know. Unless we get some commentary on this, we're not going to know. But I think Negan still got that information locked away in his head somewhere. Because even Gabriel never saw any helicopters. He was just trying to, be with Jadis as a person. And so, yeah, it's definitely interesting. It'll be interesting when it comes back around to see if they ever give us that information or not. Great question, though. If we ever do get a backstory flashback of Grady Hospital, I'm hoping we'd see Captain Hansen and his dynamic with Dawn and what was happening prior to Beth's arrival. I also would like to see expand character arcs of Joan, Shepard, and Percy. Yeah, actually, I would love to see some Captain Hansen stuff, or at least have it be explained a little bit more. I think it would really shed a lot of light on things. I do think that it's a foreshadow of something we haven't seen yet. I actually wondered, because Rick was being so crazy in Coda, if Captain Hansen represented Rick, but then somebody killed him, which seems less likely with Rick. But it also could be a foreshadow of something inside the CRM and some leadership issue that Beth is dealing with. And, maybe she'll have someone who is originally helping her that she's friends with, and maybe she sees him as like a stand-in for Rick, someone who is kind of a leader who nurtures her and is kind of fatherly toward her, and then he like goes crazy and she has to kill him. I mean, I can see that being like a storyline. So whether we actually see it or just get a little bit more clarity on it, yeah, I would definitely like that. And it would be interesting to understand what they were getting at there, because it was definitely not clear. And certainly anything that Dawn said about it is going to be muddled by her bias about it, right? So yeah, it would be interesting to see more about Joan, Shepard, and Percy. Especially Joan. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think they'll have to show us this, and it might not be so much extended character arcs for them, but just what was actually going on at Grady, because they were so cloak and dagger about it, We definitely get the sense that there was rape going on of the wards, and that, Shepard is the one who said it was just about her, which ostensibly meant Dawn, unless it didn't, because that was, some of the stuff that was happening in the hallway, that it's like, okay, what are they actually talking about here? So I think they'll have to give us some more about what's going on, just to explain what was actually going on at Grady and how these characters fit into it. So yeah, I mean, I definitely want that, and I definitely want to understand more about them. So yeah, I'm with you. I hope so too. Since Jada still remembers some of most of TF, especially Gabriel, prior to leaving for the CRM, do you think Beth still have memories of TF and post-prison survivors? Does she know what happened to Glenn, Sasha, Tyrese, Bob, and Carl? Does she still remember Judith, the baby who she was the first volunteer to be her caretaker for all of season 3 since her birth, season 4 until the downfall? I mean, I'm assuming she'll have all of her memories. We've gone back and forth about whether she'll have memory loss, but personally, in my opinion, even if she does or did at first, I think it will be dispensed with pretty quickly. So it'll either be that she had memory loss at first, but then over the years it all came back to her, and by the time we see her again, she has all of her memories. Or it could be that she's still missing some, but I think they'll do something where, like, the instant she sees Daryl or whoever having to do with Team Family, it'll, just like that, it'll come back. So I don't think that her having memory loss is going to be a huge storyline when we see her again, but it could definitely be part of the backstory. So I'm going to just go ahead and assume that she's going to have her memory of all the survivors, but she may not know what happened specifically to Glenn, Sasha, Tyrese, Bob, and Carl, because she was not there for that. So unless somebody tells her, or she had some way to observe it or get word of it somehow, she probably wouldn't know that, and it's something she's going to have to learn, and that's going to be pretty heartbreaking for her to learn all of that. So that's my opinion, and of course it could go a lot of ways. Maybe I'm wrong about the memory loss, but it'll be interesting to see. I just feel like the memory loss, it could be a good way to explain why she was never able to find them, but it will be too much of a distraction to use that as a storyline when they have so much else going on when they first find her again, just in my opinion. But we'll just have to wait and see what they have in store for us. Okay, let's stop there for today, and I will be back with more, as always. See you guys.